Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. I would like to have this session to be as interactive as possible. Definitely, I'll be showing few slides and we'll go with the topic for today. And I would expect people to put their questions for the ending. I'll have some time in at the ending. Just put your question in the chat box so we can take it whenever the session is over. So right now I'm going to share my screen. That can take a couple of minutes maybe. So stay with me. Okay. So is my screen visible?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Just hold on a second. Alright. Just trying to. Is it visible now?
It's
Can
a
you?
blacked out screen.
It is loading right now. So the slides will come soon. So just hold on a sec. Are you guys seeing a black screen right now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, now you can see the screen.
Yes, ma'am.
So there is some technical problem, I guess, but this is one of the slides you were seeing. I'm trying to put on the first. Okay, so, yeah. Okay, so today's topic is on vicarious grief, especially the vicarious trauma and grief a person might be feeling. Generally, vicarious trauma or grief, this is how this topic is, how these events around the world are actually affecting us. So, I am currently an assistant professor at CRP Ranchi. Most of you might not know about that. We can go to the topics that I'll be covering in the session. First one is to understand the vicarious trauma or grief or secondary stress, and we'll be elaborating on that first. And with the context of current Ukraine war, other socio-political events. Next is drowning in empathy, compassion, or fatigue. What is compassion fatigue? We'll come to that. And then last but not the least, how do you deal with it? So first of all, we need to start with what is vicarious trauma. So the vicarious trauma is relatively a newer concept. So it was first introduced in 1982, and the term was coined in 1995. So it was also called the compassion fatigue, and the latest term that describes the phenomenon generally associated with the cost of caring for others. So for the other terms that are used like secondary traumatic stress, secondary victimization, etc. So now there is a difference between burnout and vicarious trauma. We need to differentiate first. So burnout is essentially something that happens over time. If generally the caregivers burn out, generally the therapists burn out. So burnout can be from like both of the cases, and it is built up as a change as time off or a new or sometimes a different job can take care of burnout or improve it. Like if you are having a burnout, it is if in a particular profession or particular job maybe, then if you are just taking a different job and take some break, then burnout can be improved. On the other hand, vicarious trauma is a state of tension and preoccupation of the stories, trauma experiences described by client, especially when we are talking about vicarious trauma, especially for the clients with PTSD, like who has gone through like a war-like situation, maybe a COVID-like situation, whatever, very pathetic as a whole. When people, some people have survived those incidences, those dreadful incidences, and while they are describing their experiences to a therapist or to another person, it it's as if the other person is reliving the trauma from the way the person or the survivor has experienced it. So trauma is such a thing that has a very long history, because in even in our history, if we go back into the history, we can see that the human civilization essentially has seen many kind of massacres, wars, catastrophe, and all sorts of things. So whoever has survived or lived in that situation would be having such trauma. And whenever a person is sharing that trauma, like most of us, when we look at the picture of a massacre, when we recently, when the dead bodies were floating in the Ganga during the COVID-19 pandemic breakout, uh, listening to their stories and watching those dead bodies floating, having those news reported, it all may cause vicarious trauma. Okay. So the next is how the vicarious trauma affects. So essentially, when any trauma happens, if you are a victim of a direct trauma, you know what has been with you. I mean, what you have been through. But when a person is having a vicarious trauma, then it happens that that person avoids talking or thinking about what the trauma affected clients are talking about. They mostly become numb of it. After all, we are all human beings, and we cannot, our body is not prepared to engage in continuous stress. Okay. But what happens when we listen to other person's trauma, our senses go numb, and we probably do not pay attention after certain point of time while they are going on and on about how they have survived, what they have been through. And or the either you become numb, that is the freeze response, frozen, one person is that situation, or you are in a persistent arousal state, like every time you are just watching that kind of news which is actually causing you vicarious trauma, but you are so addicted or you are so glued to that those news or reports that you are always in the persistent arousal state. So this is how it affects. So now, what are the signs and symptoms that you have been having vicarious trauma? So first of all, having difficulty in talking about their feelings. Like person who is having vicarious trauma has very difficulty, because this is not something that they have been through, but this is something that other person have been through, and they are just watching it or listening to it, and as if they have been lived to that situation. So there is free floating anger or irritation. Definitely, if it is a man-made thing or even a pandemic or even a massacre, definitely there is an anger or irritation because we can't do anything about it and we feel helpless inside. So but we cannot even express because we have not been through that situation. It's like being offended on behalf of the others. So and then startle effect or being jumpy. If the person is constantly under stress, so it is very easy for the person to be jumpy at times, overeating or undereating. So this overeating or undereating can be a stress
You
response.
heard of this place, no?
Uh, Sorry, should I continue? Is there anything? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible. There was just some microphone.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So there is also difficulty in falling asleep or staying asleep. So difficulty in eating, like the all biological functions, the basic biological function will get hampered. One is eating, the hunger, either overeating or undereating might happen. The sleep would be disturbed. Losing, you might lose sleep over patients. At times it happens that we become so engrossed with the crisis of a patient that we keep on taking patients or keep on taking victims, and we volunteer for our service without thinking that we are actually being uh, having the vicarious trauma and we are actually reliving the traumatic experiences. So essentially there is I mean, we always, we cannot say that that point of time I am having this kind of reaction, because those signs and symptoms are rarely visible to a caretaker or a caregiver or a therapist per se, because we always neglect ourselves first to serve the others. And the next is, they might be worried that they are not doing enough for the clients. What happens if you talk to a person who has been through a traumatic experience? You always feel somewhere that guilty inside, that that person has been through so much. This is the internal compassion that we all have. Okay, most of us have this kind of compassion, but then we keep on thinking that, oh my goodness, that person has been through so much, and that person is helpless. They have survived a bomb attack, they have survived a pandemic and everything, and we are probably not doing enough for them. So also the dreams might come that the trauma experience that has happened to the client and all, they're happening with me in the dream. Maybe diminished joy towards things that they once enjoy. Of course it is also a sign of depression. It may be because they are already engrossed, the mind is engrossed with the traumatic experience of the client. Feeling trapped by their work as a counselor, that is in the crisis situation. Definitely there are not many counselors available to actually cater to lots of people. So in case of war, if you can see that lots of people are fleeing from the country right now. Even from Ukraine, lots of people are fleeing, so they have very little resources, and mostly they need food, shelter. uh, like sometime I was just watching some reports where somebody is saying that after several days I took a shower, and that made my day. Like I was feeling so happy because I could shower, but at the very next moment I was feeling very helpless and very depressed, and that person started crying because the family members of her was trapped still in Kiev. So she was grateful that she could go to Poland and have some food and have a shower or something. So in this case, people actually, the counselors are not available, and those even who are available, they feel trapped that I cannot avert the crisis at this point of time. What is my job? I cannot soothe that person because that person has been through a lot which is irreversible. So then diminished feeling of satisfaction and personal accomplishment. Of course, if we feel that we cannot do anything for the client, generally we are supposed to do, In this crisis situation, we feel that we are dissatisfied, we cannot accomplish anything, we are actually not doing good for our job. Next is dealing with intrusive thoughts of client with especially severe trauma history. Like if we are talking with a rape victim, a person, especially a child, who does not even know what she has been through. She is only describing the pain and agony. If you talk about the recent incidences of Hathras, where the family members even did not get the body of the victim. So in these cases, if somebody goes and try to talk with them, these are severe trauma history. The whole family is traumatized. If there is a severe case of rape or if there is murder, uh, in severe cases, uh, intrusive thoughts may haunt actually the client, because they only have flashbacks, they only have visualization, they only have those very moments which they have survived, and maybe they have seen other people dying at the very same shelling that might have happened inside their building where they were living together. So this kind of things a therapist need to deal with. Then feelings of hopelessness associated with their work, though we cannot, like in as a therapist or as a counselor, it is our job to take care of others mental health, but at the same time, while the situations are so dire and so severe, there is after certain point you just can't say anything to soothe the client. So there comes the hopelessness, that we cannot actually do anything for them at this very moment. And also blaming others for things like for very small things, or even why the war is happening, you blaming here and there and something like that. So this are the things. And what happens when you take your job at a very personal level? So you actually drown in the compassion fatigue or the vicarious trauma. What happens, like Russian invasion of Ukraine is currently resulting in humanitarian crisis. Millions of people are fleeing the country, they are bombarded, they are leaving the cities. It was once their home and now it has become a ruin. So every time you watch this thing, every time you listen to it, and if you happen to have any friends or relatives, even lots of Indian students were there. So when you listen to their stories and all, you just drown in their passion, in the compassion, because at times we are getting news reports that they don't have even drinking water, they are just melting down, they are collecting ice and then they are melting it down to eat, to drink, and that is not at all healthy. Lots of people are having diarrhea and other diseases they have, and they have walked like for hours to one border while they were humiliated by the Ukrainian border force. They are not accepted, and lots of things have coming around. So when we listen to it, we just drown in the compassion fatigue. War victims, especially women, children, uh, when we see them, that how helpless they are, uh, we just drown ourselves into the compassion fatigue. We just get ourselves fatigued because of the compassion. Then the food crisis, water shortage, hunger problem, and not only this Ukraine Russia war, it is also for like the war has triggered the food prices to go high. And in the greater picture, we can see the country that they are not they do not have the sufficient food for drought or some other reason. The food prices are going high and they are dying. Actually, the children are dying there because of the food crisis. For example, Somalia, Morocco, who actually import most of their food, or especially wheat, barley, semolina, this kind of thing from Ukraine and Russia. These things have stopped, so it is triggering a food crisis. So scarcity of basic livelihood among the poor around the world due to socio-political conflict. Not only this is, before this also there was a war in Syria. There is also a war for decades. These are going on for last 4 decades. Iran, Iraq. Before that, in the Iran right now, news is coming that once the Taliban has taken control of everything, so they are saying that women, female, they are not allowed, girls are not allowed to continue their education after class 6. Previously, they have said that they can continue their education, but they are denying that at this very moment. So lots of socio-political conflicts, and it is going to be predicted that the one portion of the population would be deprived, and they are always oppressed by the other half of the population. So if you listen to this kind of stories and you happen to interact with these people, and especially the survivors or the people who could not survive but had to stay back, you just drown in the compassion fatigue. So what kind of behavioral change we can see? We can see frequent job changes, tardiness, free floating anger or irritability, absenteeism, irresponsibility, overwork, irritability, exhaustion, talking to oneself, a critical symptom, we can say. Going out to avoid being alone, dropping out to community affair, rejecting physical and emotional closeness. So this kind of changes we can see in behavior of a person. The person might not be aware that the person has already drowned in compassion fatigue. But this kind of behavioral changes, the other people, maybe the co-worker, maybe the person, maybe the parents, or maybe the spouse, maybe the boyfriend, maybe the girlfriend, they can notice this kind of behavioral changes in a person who is having a compassion fatigue. Though the symptoms might look similar to depression or anxiety per se, but if you dig a little deeper, you may understand that what kind of clients they are seeing, so, and what are their stories. And once you look into their stories and all, you may understand that this is happening, this behavioral changes are happening because of the compassion fatigue itself. Then in interpersonal relationship also, you can see there are lots of stuff conflict happening. They can start blaming others, there are conflictual engagement, poor relationships with other people, maybe in interpersonal relationships is going badly, poor communication, the person is sitting alone and not talking to other people, impatience, if you try to reason out with these people, they are not listening anymore, avoidance of working with clients with trauma histories. Like, this is one of the most crucial point. If a person is already drowned in the compassion fatigue, that person would not like to talk to another person who has a trauma history, because in the first place all these problems are happening because the person has too much identified with this trauma victim. uh, for example, we can say that if your glass is already full with trauma, you cannot put more water to it. If you try to put water on it, it will just spill off from the glass. So it's not possible for that person to work with this trauma, with patients or clients with trauma histories anymore. Lack of collaboration. The person would stop talking to other people, even the co-worker or the peers, for collaboration to work on any case or work on any other thing. Withdrawal and isolation from the colleagues. Change in relationship with the colleagues. You might see that the jovial person, you have always known the person to be jovial, happy-go-lucky. Suddenly the person has changed into a very grumpy, sturdy kind of an individual. And no difficulty having in rewarding relationships also might be present in interpersonal domain. Now in personal values and beliefs, that will also change, like dissatisfaction in every aspects of life, negative perception of thinking about everything to be negative, loss of interest, apathy, blaming others, lack of appreciation, lack of interest and caring. The person becomes detached from everything. There would be hopelessness, there would be low self-esteem, there would be worried that I'm still not doing enough. The guilt, the foregoing guilt, everlasting guilt will be there, that I'm never enough, I have not done enough, the people I am seeing have been through so much. So this kind of thing, and questioning their frame of reference, like what is the identity of mine, what is the worldview and or spirituality, like why, like we all have some kind of coping mechanism. One of the most common coping mechanism in India especially is the spiritualism, that everything happens is happening for the reason, this is something that my destiny is written in that way. So this is something that we are prone to uh, sort out once we are having this kind of problematic thing going on with our life. Then disruption in self capacity, ability to maintain positive sense of self, ability to modulate strong affect, or ability to maintain an inner sense of connection. Then disruption in needs, beliefs, and relationships, safety, trust, esteem, control, intimacy, everything gets disrupted while you are into, like, this does not necessarily mean that everything will happen at once, but some or the other features might be seen in all these domains. So now the job performance, how the job performance would look like when a person is having this kind of compassion fatigue. First of all, there will be low motivation to work, to do any work. Then increased error. Definitely, if your mind is somewhere else, if you are distracted, there will be increased error, decreased quality, avoidance of job responsibility, over involved in details or perfectionism. This is one of the like biggest thing when you have a guilt inside that I'm not good enough, you try to do everything in perfect detail, no matter whether it is necessary or not. And then person become rigid. They cannot think flexibly. They only think in a very pessimistic, very narrow perspective of themselves. So now the most important part, how to deal with such things. So understanding and recognizing own trauma, that is the first and foremost thing that anyone need to do. Like and it is applicable not only for vicarious trauma, but it is applicable to any kind of psychopathology we try to deal, whether it is for ourselves or for the others. First and foremost thing is to understand and recognize own trauma. Like I think that most of the people who have registered for this webinar are mostly from a psychology background. They are aspiring psychologists or counselors or already established psychologists. So they might be knowing that the first and foremost thing to while we are seeing a client or seeing a patient or whatever, the first and foremost thing is to take the history. In the history itself, it gives us a very fair idea of what exactly is happening with a person. So once you understand, and the history taking is important, so very important in throughout the therapeutic processes, like the information that we get from the history and everything that the person is saying, the family members or the informants are saying, helps us to understand and recognize the problem. So the problem recognition is the first and foremost thing to deal with any sort of psychopathology, and it is also for trauma. Now, the people who have already been in the psychology field, they already know that how to understand and how to pinpoint one's own problem. At times it might not be so obvious to us until unless somebody else like tap on it or put a finger on it, or they make us realize that what we are doing, like the behavioral change or the problematic like interpersonal changes, or there is a change in the value system of a person, like Somebody is actually, if they are thinking,
but I will not say that yes, this is a good job. But no way, sometimes we can. Every country is our Namaskaram.
Namaskaram, namaskaram, sir. Namaskaram. Very nice to hear you again. And particularly contract act is a very important act here. Thank God.
I don't know why.
I would request everybody to please mute the disturbance back.
तो अभी किसी को ये पता ही नहीं था ऐसे का
continue because I get lots of noise.
Continue.
Before marriage, I am very every one of us. There are every human being contract. Now, let's take that. And we do not know in that law is
Yeah, ma'am, you can.
Okay. So the first what I was saying was like, first of all, we need to understand and recognize our own trauma. And then the second is understanding own limit. Like this guilt of us always would tell us that we are not providing sufficiently, we are not good enough for the clients, and client have been through a lot. What you are doing is not actually helping the client. This doubt would always be with us. But then we need to understand our own limit, because we are also human beings. Whoever is a therapist, a counselor, or whatever it is, we need to recognize that we are not omnipotent, and we cannot actually do not have a magic stick with us to make everything good or better. But we have certain limitations, and we are definitely there to help people out in their from their trauma, definitely, yes, but there is a limit to it. And where is the limit? If you do not understand, if somebody is already having a trauma, vicarious trauma, at that point it is recommended the person gives do not take any cases of trauma further, even the ongoing cases. If the person is having too much of vicarious trauma, it is always better to hand it over to somebody else, or have another counselor on board to deal with the patient. So then next is take care of the own mental health before helping, definitely. Like there is a default announcements in the aircraft, people might be aware of. Put your own mask before helping others. Like when there is an oxygen deficit, you just the mask will come down, and put your own mask properly before you can help others. So taking care of own mental health before helping others is very important and very much required. And then practice before preaching. Like it is very easy for a second person to say, okay, you have lived this situation, but now what? You need to get back to your normalcy or something like that. So you need to practice what you are preaching. Like if you are saying your client that, okay, you need to get up early morning or at a comfortable time of yours, and then you need to do exercise, then you need to do this, you need to put yourself in that person's condition and understand, is it possible for that person to do it? Can you do it? So this is the therapeutic compassion, therapeutic empathy we are looking for, that is also required before we can actually preach about it. Then we can also organize some units to deal with vicarious trauma informed organization, like how to deal with the vicarious trauma. So in different pockets, people can be trained how to deal with this kind of vicarious trauma, and some organizations can be put forward for this task. There are already several task forces like Red Cross Society, and there are UNICEF who actually work in these areas, who actually make the humanitarian corridors in different areas, who deal with also the food crisis. Wherever there is a war, there is a massacre, there is a pandemic breakdown and everything, this kind of organization always put forward. And locally also we can organize, and wherever it is required, a team is sent, like in India also. I personally know few organization who actually come in the forefront whenever there is an emergency and a crisis in the society. And also definitely if somebody is feeling not good about the trauma kind of experiences clients to deal with, they always can go for a peer counseling. Like it is always helpful, and a therapist also might need therapy at times. There might be some kind of problem, any kind of suggestion, when a person actually we cannot see ourselves most of the time, so we have to see ourselves in the mirror. So a peer counseling can help us in that way. A peer can be our mirror. Through him or her we can actually see ourselves. So this kind of techniques we can always can deal with. This might not be all encompassing or all exhaustive. Some references are there definitely. So I am unable to. Yeah. Now, do you have any question? This is my reference that I have. If you have any questions, we'll be taking it. Anyone has any questions? Vaibhavi, can you just check the chat box if anyone has any question?
Hello, ma'am. May I ask one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you tell us more about how peer counseling works in general, like an overview, so to say? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So the thing is, the peer counseling is not only for this kind of vicarious trauma or something. This can also help to deal with the burnout. What happens? Peers are essentially those people, mostly the colleagues and the friends, and another mental health expert actually. You cannot go for a peer counseling. If you are a counselor or therapist, you cannot go for a other person who is a layman in this area. So if you have any problem, if you are dealing with patients or clients who has very traumatic experiences, and you actually are unable or overwhelmed with the traumatic experiences the person is having, and you are drowned into the vicarious trauma, and you can understand or recognize some signs or symptoms that I have already mentioned, then you can just sit with your peer, which is supposed to be a mental health expert. Okay, so in that case you deal and discuss, and that person may try and help you to understand and recognize from where your problems are coming. Like they not only can help you to deal with it, but also they can help you to understand or pinpoint where the problem is starting from. You might not be able to know that you are already overwhelmed with the traumatic experiences and you are already drowned in vicarious trauma, but rather that your friend of yours can actually tell you that what is exactly happening with you at this very point. Okay, so this is how it works, and pinpointing, and you both can, a catharsis can happen. You may pour your heart out into the discussion, and then you might show your emotion which you cannot show in front of the client or any other person, but you can show your emotions, and that can be dealt with, and because you know that the person will accept you unconditionally, because that person is also an expert and in the mental health area. So it needs to be non-judgmental, it needs to be open, it needs to be empathic. I mean, therapeutic empathy needs to be there too as well. And then you can brainstorm regarding techniques which you can apply to the client to deal with their problems at that very point of time. I think that can, I mean, this is how generally the peer counseling helps people. Any more question? Is there any more question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is generally about trauma. Other than counseling, other things like yoga or exercise or any other activities which can help in resolving trauma, maybe if you can say about those things.
Okay, so like I mentioned, that there are lots of techniques you can use. I mean, there is no hard and fast rule while it is a trauma, but generally there are designated therapy even, not really therapy, but like trauma tapping techniques are there. But as we are talking about vicarious trauma, not the direct trauma, I have not mentioned those techniques because those are essentially used for people who are the survivors of certain massacre or something like that, who are having PTSD per se. But yes, like I mentioned, there is a point: practice before you preach. Like how you are helping other person to deal with their trauma, you can practice. You need to practice it on yourself first. So yes, it has been seen that certain kind of exercises, physical exercises, always like generate certain happy neurotransmitter like serotonin, dopamine in the brain. It ejects there, and it actually helps people to be happy. Any sort of physical exercise, it doesn't need to be a rigorous exercise, but regular exercise and aerobic exercises, like where you inhale and exhale with the rhythm of your physiological activity, that can actually help people to like feel happy, feel good about themselves. The neurotransmitter in the brain, serotonin and dopamine, are released when this kind of aerobic exercises or any kind of exercises which is good for the body, healthy exercises. Not all exercise is good for everyone, so it depends on your height, weight, uh, depends on your body flexibility and everything. If you think that tomorrow I would start exercise and suddenly feel happy, this will never going to happen. Okay, so exercise is something that everyone can do and everyone needs to do with their body, but it depends on your body strength, stamina, capability, flexibility and everything. Especially yoga or power yoga, if a person, meditation is different from yoga posture. Okay, Yoga postures are different, and most of the people actually cannot do all sorts of yoga. Asanas especially, because they take a lot of flexibility and practice to perform them. Do not fracture yourself, or especially if person is already into trauma, it is rather not recommended to let them try something very radical or very drastic if they have no prior experience. So it might add to their trauma or stress, but rather we can go for some freehand exercises, some aerobic exercises. Meditation, on the other hand, definitely is a good choice. It can actually help a person to concentrate better and all. Lots of other benefits have been found. But at the same time, anything and everything, if you do, you need to understand the state of mind of a person. If you give the person which is a too difficult task for the person, might not be helpful at all at this traumatic moment. Yes, they can be helpful when the person is not in trauma, but maybe in mild depression or any kind of other psychopathology other than psychosis, it might be helpful. But if you want to make a person learn something new when the person is already in a vicarious trauma or trauma, it would rather add more pressure to the person, and the person would not like to come back to you for further therapy. Okay. Anyone else would like to ask anything?
I want to ask a question. I am from HR. I am not a counselor and I don't do counseling. That very, very heavy topic which you have dealt with very nicely, I would say. The question is that when I have seen people, they keep on repeating what they are saying. So you're saying that taking notes is important. I think by taking notes, we can, to a certain extent, minimize that repetition which they do normally. Is there any other way to stop the repetition?
Is it in the contrast with the trauma I am dealing with?
Yeah, I'm talking only about your subject today.
Definitely. See, repetition or repeating something which is a very common thing when a person is having a traumatic experiences, because what happens in PTSD, like if we are talking about vicarious trauma, though we are not talking about PTSD. Vicarious trauma is the counselor mostly, or the person who has listening to the story of the victim is having. But yes, what you have mentioned, that can be seen in a person who are having vicarious trauma. Especially it is seen in persons with PTSD, because there is a flashback that comes. Okay. So definitely a person who is drowned in a vicarious trauma, the person is not in a correct state of mind to even write down or not to repeat, because it is the trauma that is speaking. If the person would have been in a correct state of mind, the person would not have repeated the thing in the first place. So it is important for the other person who is seeing the person who is in vicarious trauma to point out that, okay, see that this is one of the symptoms of yours being drowned in vicarious trauma. So I think writing it down will not help, rather it will make another kind of problem for the person who is already vicarious. That is my point.
Okay. So how will you stop it? I mean, if you are there, just by making him aware?
First of all, to solve any problem, we need to recognize there is a problem. Okay. Definitely, it is. If I'm seeing somebody who is having vicarious trauma, definitely it is my job to make the person understand and aware what kind of problem the person is having. I have mentioned a lot of problems. It is an list, but it does not necessarily mean the person will have all. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. So
Yeah.
that the person is having, it is important for us to make the person aware of it. Once they are aware of it, they are mental health expert anyway. So it is our responsibility to make him or her understand, and enable a catharsis. Like let the person show the emotions, let it come out. Instead of suppressing things inside, which therapists have a tendency to do. And when it comes out, the problem is more or less solved there. And then the next step of brainstorming and solution focused kind of technique we use, where we brainstorm and we see, okay, now this has happened. Now I recognize where I was and why I was behaving in the same way. Now how to rectify it. Now I need to take care of myself. How am I going to do that? What suits me? Like, there are coping mechanisms for everyone, and everyone's coping is different. I might cope in some way, A way, the other person will be coping in B way, somebody else will be coping in C way. So it is to understand what is soothing me right now and how I can cope. And that can be brainstormed, and while we can cope, we can start those mechanisms, we start coping, and the symptom will be reduced.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody was raising a hand, I saw. Somebody was raising a hand. I think somebody's name Shweta, she raised a hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to further address, I think Mr. Krishnamurti who was asking this question. So, but then you covered it, madam. So I think it's fine.
Okay.
Because I come from the HR field as well, and I thought I could answer him in terms of the organization context. So, yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
So we have like few minutes left. So can we?
Shweta, my question is, can Shweta say what she wants to say as an HR person from an organization, from a corporate? Can you just add something?
No, madam, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So basically what ma'am was saying, I think just further adding to that, because a lot of times what happens is people repeat the same thing that has gone through because they're going through the trauma on their head. That story keeps repeating on and on with them. So if you just, if we as HR are a little more empathetic and probe them, you have already told this part of it. So then what happened next? You know, probe them further questions. This we have already discussed, and what next happened. So, you know, you probe them to the level 2, maybe. So then we graduate to the story further, or we graduate to what is it that he or she wants to, you know, how they want the story to move on to. What is it that they expect from the organization or the HR for that matter? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I would just like to say something, Shweta.
Yeah.
Just to rectify something. The thing is, the vicarious trauma we are talking about, and the trauma per se, those kind of people generally don't go to an organizational setup per se, and it happens in the organization, but mostly the burnout part happens, and the dealing for burnout is different than with the vicarious trauma. So what you were trying to say essentially is like, you can stop the client and make the client aware that this thing has already covered, and let's go to the next point. But that cannot be done more practically most of the time with the person with trauma. You just let the person talk when the person is talking, even if the session time is over and all. Because catharsis is one of the most important part while you are dealing with a patient or person with trauma. Most of the time they don't talk, and it's very difficult. It becomes very difficult for us to make them talk about the trauma because no one wants to relive it. And once they start talking about it, they might just use single 1, 2, 3 phases. That's all. let them talk. I mean, talking is essential. It might feel like it is repetition or something like that, but you cannot actually make them stop because you want to discuss something else. It never happens that way practically.
So I'll just tell you where exactly the situation comes from. The organization HR context is like when we talk about this particular trauma, it doesn't happen in corporate, but then there are a lot of baggages people carry with them even before they join the organization, right? So it can be their personal baggages or the baggages that they carry from their previous organization or the bosses for that matter, or even at a personal front, right? So there has been me as an HR, this is an instance that I'm giving you. There has been time and again that there are employees who come to us with the same situation, and we address that situation, and they come back to us about the same thing. Say for example, madam bus mein humko, I'm sorry, I'm giving you in Hindi because I've dealt with blue collar employees. So, madam, we have issues even with the bus seats. We don't have the same bus seats, right? So we have addressed that issue. I know it's a very nominal issue, but when you deep dive and you further probe them as to how else can we handle this question, then you get to understand that there is a trauma this person has probably gone through in a personal front, maybe with an accident on a family level or something, and that is why he keeps coming back with the bus seat issue. That's a further drill down that we have, when we as an HR have done and we figured out. But because HR also come with certain deadlines to match up, when we are doing these one-on-one meetings, all in all, that was where I was trying to help Mr. Krishnamurti, figure out how can we make it shorter and that kind of
I would suggest then in that case, this is a great job to understand if the person has already gone through because the person is complaining about particular thing. I would rather suggest you to let the person suggest the person to seek for mental health help. Like that is the most important part to do. Therapists, psychotherapists, counselors are not also equipped, I would say, because it takes a lot of training and practices to uh, have those kind of skill to deal with the trauma. It is not really your day-to-day counseling a person can do. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of energy, effort, and lots of understanding of trauma per se. So I would rather suggest you, if you are dealing with certain situation, you let the person go to an expert in this field, like maybe a psychotherapist, recognized psychotherapist, or like RCI registered clinical psychologist to be precise. And then we can actually help the person out. I mean, oppressing the catharsis is not going to help in the long run. If there is an unresolved trauma in that person, that needs to come out, that needs to be dealt with proper care and all. Okay, that is that would be thing. You have done a good job on that. I would appreciate you for that. But the next part is this.
Yeah, I'm working on that. The management has to approve of it, so we're working on that.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you, madam, for the wonderful session.
Thank you.
Gauri was raising hand, I guess.
Yes. So as we know that there are already two people from the HR field and yourself, I would like to ask that how how does one develop a sensitivity to this concept at the workplace? Because given the pandemic, the lines between the personal life and professional life have been blurred to an extent, and it has suddenly become much more about workplace productivity. So how would one promote sensitivity about this concept at the workplace in an optimal way?
What do you mean by sensitivity?
Such as people interacting with each other at the workplace. Sometimes things get stressful, and given the amount of pressure people are going through currently at their workplaces because of the pandemic, it can erupt in ways. So how does one promote or create an atmosphere at the workplace where people are aware that the person in front of them is another person as well, and they could be going through this, that sort of thing.
Okay. The first and foremost thing I would like to say that it has nothing to, there are kind of thing that happens with all of us while there is a pandemic kind of a situation. We all have experienced some sort of trauma, either vicarious or direct trauma, because every one of us probably have infected with COVID, or have have family members who have been infected COVID. We have all lost family members, relatives, distant or close neighbors in COVID. So we all are actually traumatized. So that is something, and the sensitivity, it's not like it was not present in us. Otherwise, we would not have survived before the pandemic also. So those who are not sensitive or insensitive before the pandemic, they will remain to be such and such, because personality is something that you cannot change overnight. But yes, after the pandemic, people have been homebound, and home has become the new office, and the differentiation between the home and the office has been blurred. So yes, it might take some time. So but what we can do is we can put some small quotations, small posters in every corner of the office, where like quotations like you are doing good, carry on. This is a simple statement. No one needs to say it, but if you put it somewhere, people would get some hope. And there is a concept called subliminal perception, where people do not need to get everything loud, but on the back of their mind these things goes. Okay, so we can use that technique where we can have the motivating thing, the somewhere in the corner we can attach some sensitive quotes in the desktop of everyone, like on the first day when they are joining their office, so they start their day with that. We can have beautiful artworks and make the person appreciate those things. So maybe they sound unrelated, but actually if you create an environment in that way where people appreciate the labor of the other person, I think sensitivity goes and grows automatically. And this is not something that you can enforce a person into, but rather build a relationship with other people, so it makes them sensitive more and more. Okay, is that are you satisfied with the answer? Okay, so somebody was asking that I am very impatient, and how can I develop patience to hear others out? I would like to say that we all are very impatient, and if you think that something is not interesting, we just generally become impatient. So don't worry. Patience is something, it develops with interest. Try to do something that interests you. If you think that it is difficult to have patience for a very long time, you are actually on the right track, because our attention dips after every 20 minutes. So try to take some break if possible, like 5 minutes break, but not more than that. And then again you come back, and then you do your work, and whenever you again feel like being impatient, then you take a break. If it is difficult for you to go off from your seat, what I would suggest that let your mind wander for 5 minutes. Like you just close your eyes or open your eyes and just let your mind wander for a few minutes, and then come back. And it is always better if you have a watch or stopwatch with you. Just let your mind wander. You on the stopwatch, when it becomes 5, you just push back yourself and concentrate again. It's very difficult if you want to do something for a very long time, so break it down. In that way you can actually, I think it helps. If I think we have exceeded the time already. If anyone have any question, that's fine. If I would like to, then we can end the session. I hope everyone is out of questions by this time. Okay, well, we will over to you then.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out time and addressing this issue. I am sure most of us are going through some kind of vicarious grief or vicarious trauma. And it's also very overwhelming because it becomes difficult to point out what exactly is causing us to get so sad and something like that. So I think, just give me a sec, sorry. Yeah, so thank you so much for explaining it in a simple way and even giving out ways how we can deal with it. I'm sure all of us have definitely benefited from this session. And I would also like to thank our participants for attending. And if you have missed any part of this session, the recording will be provided to you within the next week. I think we can end the session here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.